Welcome, Legionnaires, to the Long Live the Legion podcast, where we talk about the Legion of Superheroes comic book team and break subjects down so that whether you're just out of the Legion Academy or you're a longtime veteran, you get to know the team a little bit better. I'm your co-host, Jim.
And I'm your co-host, Jay.
Welcome to episode 21. What do we have on the mission monitor board for today, Jay?
We've got a great episode for you today. It is the spotlight on Phantom Girl, or Apparition, or Phase, or is there any other names that I'm missing there?
So we're going to spend her real name.
Yes. So we're going to spend the episode talking about Tinya Wazzo.
Excellent. And then I do have a couple of dogs in here that are going to be helping us podcast today, too. So we'll see how that goes. That should be fun. So let's talk about Tinya. So Tinya Wazzo, a.k.a. Phantom Girl and Apparition, et cetera, is from the planet Bigstil. Sorry. This is a weird one to pronounce, so I have to figure out how to do it half the time before I say it. Bigstil. And she was born on April 21st, 2957 or 2979, depending on which continuity we're talking about here. So what can you tell me about what's so special about Tinya?
So actually, I wanted to back up just a quick sec, just because you brought it up, the pronunciation of the planet, which I actually took a look at to try to figure out, because I always pronounce everything wrong. So I wanted to take a look and figure out if I got it right. And I found 3 different pronunciations of Bigstil, or Bigitzel, or Bigzittle. And funnily enough, I don't know if in my head I've ever pronounced them like any of those. I always say, I think I'm closer to you like Bigstil, but it's more like Bigitzel, I think is where I go. I always stress that Z.
And on Fun and Games, we talk
so
about
let's just agree for this episode it's going to be Bigstil.
Yes,
that's cool with that. Okay, and it's
I had a similar thing, right? I didn't really. I would always go, I think, Bigzittle first.
So
that was my first headcanon pronunciation for the world. Phantom Girl was featured in Young Justice a few years ago, and they actually said the name of the planet there. So that's where I started actually doing.
And I will call out one good Legion podcast that always says Bug Tussle. But we'll go with Bigstil.
That's so fun too.
Okay, so let's focus a little bit on Phantom Girl. So she's the 5th Legionnaire in continuity, the 5th person to join. So she's one of the early members. She first showed up in May of 1961 in Action Comics 276, created by Jerry Siegel and Jim Mooney. And actually, there's a ton of new Legionnaires in this issue. They throw, I think, Triplicate Girl, and there's a few others that show up.
And that was the Supergirl's Super Friends episode, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so to kind of put it nicely, she kind of just stayed in the background for a lot of the Silver Age.
Yeah, I agree. When I was kind of researching and prepping for this, I was shocked at how few stories that she's actually in through the Silver Age and even the Bronze Age, too. She's not in a lot of stories at all. She's in the background or hanging out with Ultra Boy is basically where you see her most of the time. It's not until I think really Paul Levitz gets a hold of her and really starts doing stuff with her in the 80s, and where she becomes a little bit more of a presence.
I think she started grabbing attention in the Bronze Age. Again, to have more appearances than the Silver Age is literally she shows up once a year.
Yeah.
But I think the moment Dave Cockrum gave her new costume, which is one of the best Legion costumes of all time. I think I can say that pretty safely without somebody coming at me. I think then she started showing up more. And then I actually think Jerry Conway was the first person who wanted to do something with her. And I think he was more comfortable writing her powers. I'm kind of just reading into this. I don't know. That's why she's really important in the whole Ultra Boy stuff. When we did the Reflector Saga, she's a key part of that. But you're right. It wasn't until Paul Levitz that she actually started becoming a strong female character that we know her to be. I think she's had a lot of her power taken away with a lot of the different reboots. And so she starts becoming this key player when Levitz takes over. What I really liked about what he did was that he made her he made her not perfect, if that makes any sense. Like, she would be prone to making nasty comments, especially about Timberwolf, who she obviously hated for a lot of these issues. She would piss off Ultra Boy sometimes when she was like, no, I'm going to go do this by myself. Like, you figure it out. And they did some stuff with that. And then there's the great friendship with her and Shadowlass, which I thought was really well handled and really, really well written. And so she becomes, by the 80s, she's this central character. She's key to the Legion, and I think she's got a lot of fans. The great proof that she's popular, but the readers don't feel a need to protect her, is the fact that she was never a Legion leader. She never is in that position. She never even I think, shows up in any of the votes, which you can argue is like, okay, so then she wasn't popular. Dream Girl becomes leader solely because the readers are like, hey, this woman never appears. We want to see her some more. And Phantom Girl never had to deal with that. She's always there. She's always central.
I did do some research here in the Who's Who of the Legion about her that found some interesting little tidbits. So she has a family. The accepted real backstory of how she came into the Legion, that she was basically a rich kid in Bigstill who was at this all-girls school. She was a constant pain in the ass and skipping classes and things like that. And then she hears about the Legion and she smuggles herself out and stows away on a ride to take her to Earth. And then she sneaks into Legion headquarters and surprises the Legionnaires. And they're like, oh, we need to have you on the team. But yeah, she has a brother, and their brother's name is Jimma. Gyma, so I'm going to say Jimma because that's what that looks like. She is the longest consecutively serving Legionnaire in the original continuity, and she trained to fight under Karate Kid, and like you said, she's best friends with Shadowlass. Also, probably in the Giffen time frame, the Giffen beer bomb time frame, they named her mother, so her mother's Tinya Wazzo, and we don't hear a whole lot of her initially, but her mother becomes much more prominent in the post-Zero Hour time frame. She's given this backstory in the late 80s and he's of this bratty teenager, which is interesting, given the fact that, and like you just mentioned, she's kind of given a little bit of attitude as the character is developed in the 80s.
Yeah, she definitely needed it, right? Like in the Silver Age, she's just kind of the Silver Age Legion. A lot of times it's just ooh girls, and like they don't really get a lot. And then in the Silver Age, there was a lot of just her standing around. There's a few issues. We talked about this when we did our Bronze Age spotlight. There's the one issue where she's the one who flies into the center of the planet to stop the bomb when everybody else is kind of standing around and they don't know what to do. So she starts to get a little bit more agency and she starts to get a little bit stronger. But yeah, I kind of like the idea of her just being a different kind of Legionnaire. There's so many of these stories where it's this perfect person and the family loves her and they went a different direction with her. And I thought that was really nice. I was kind of thinking about it. Like, I'm just going to keep focusing on OG for a bit. Because when I was a kid, like she was one of my favorite Legionnaires as I was reading these books. And I was trying to figure out why. Because, you start thinking like, okay, what was I drawn to? Her powers were, I don't want to say easy to explain, but they were good enough that she could get out of jams, but they weren't world beaters. So she was indestructible or whatever. And then I was thinking about this and like in the 80s, you've got the Legion and you've got her and then you've got the X-Men and you've got Kitty Pryde, who essentially have the exact same powers. And Kitty Pryde's one of the most popular X-Men at the time because she's the reader entry point. She's the teenager. Okay. Now, personality wise, they're completely opposite. I'm just going to say that. But like, I wonder if there's a little bit of a mental connection for me where I'm like, yeah, I like the X-Men. I like the Legion. Hey, this is kind of the same. Or it's just as a preteen boy and you see that costume. It could be that as well. It's possible.
Well, it's interesting you're saying that because my exposure to the character was in the post-Zero Hour time frame and vastly different character as far as how she's portrayed. She was not my favorite. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, and understandably so. Okay, so let me ask you this. Do we want to get into Reboot yet, or do we want to open the huge Pandora's box that is 5 years later?
Let's do the 5 years later stuff first because it filters in from the OG where she's definitely this very defined character, especially when you get through the Baxter series. And then, then we go to the 5 years later and the writers decide to do a little bit of a change up.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing that they did. And I have argued actually in my writing that maybe Phantom Girl got away with the best possible result of all of the characters in 5 years later because they took her out of 5 years later. So for those of you who haven't read it, and there's going to be a ton of stuff going on. So, 5 years later, by about issue 5 or 6, is essentially they reboot the whole thing when Mon-El kills Time Trapper. And then there has to be this magic spell where they need RJ Brand and they need Superboy and then all these things to kind of make the Legion, right? And you've got Gloreth, who's now the new villainess, the new sorceress who's wrecking everything for the Legion. And she decides she's going to get revenge on Ultra Boy. So what she does is she actually makes it look like Tinya dies in a shuttle accident, but in actual fact sends her back in time, wipes her memory, and she ends up a member of so it's the Legion, but it's the Legion Legion. I never know how to refer to that, right?
20th century version of that,
Yeah. So she's suddenly on a different super team. She has no memory, but it's obvious that this is Phantom Girl. She's in the exact same costume that Phantom Girl was in pre the move, exact same powers, looks the same, but now she's this different hero, right? And ironically enough, she still becomes best friends with the Shadowlass version of this, 1989 Legion. And so it's great. Like, it's a great story for Ultra Boy because they get to have him as somebody who's mourning the loss of the woman who would be his wife. And so they get to play a lot with him. But the reason why I say like Phantom Girl maybe survived the 5 years later the best is that now you had a different creative team who actually liked the character and didn't want to wreck her. Whereas I think, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, I think the Beer Bombs have actually said like they didn't like her as a character. They didn't want to deal with her, and that's why they got rid of her. Have you heard anything like that, or am I just pulling something out?
I'm not sure if they didn't like her. I don't think I've heard that.
Okay.
But, they certainly, I mean, I just agree. I totally agree with what you're saying with what the dramatic opportunities that gave for Ultra Boy. And they certainly did take advantage of that. But that's a whole other thing because they did a lot of retconning with all that stuff too. But she is absolutely 100% Tinya Wazzo, because when you look at the who's who at the time, so I guess in the 90s they did a who's who type of release that were all these loose leaf binders, so you could put whatever pages in whatever order you wanted. And she is specifically identified as Tinya Wazzo in that who's who. But of course, as time goes on, they do play with that, right? Because once we get closer to 0 Hour, they actually say, "Oh, well, no, she's not really Tinya."
And it was kind of funny because as a fan of that book of Legion 89, 90, 91, whatever, like they're writing her as Tinya Wazzo, right? So her memory is not coming back, but her personality is coming back, and it's very clear. This is somebody who's very experienced and has been a superhero for a long time and knows what she's doing and doesn't take any crap from anybody. I think in the original ones, it was Alan Grant writing them, and then Mark Waid took over. Yeah. And in both cases, they're handling her like it's Phantom Girl, right? There's no mystery. Yeah. And then 0 Hour happens, and suddenly we're wrapping up the Legion story, and suddenly we're going to reboot the Legion, and we have a Legionnaire on another book that they don't want to get rid of because FaZe has become this key member of her title. And I'm sure the writer, and I think it was Tom Pyre by this point in time, he's like, I don't want to give this up. She's a great character. So here's step one of the confusion.
Yeah, I think Phantom Girl is a great microcosm of all the crazy continuity crap that you have to deal with as a Legion fan, I guess.
Well, I would say as a fan of DC, like they just seem to keep doing these moments of like, hey, we're going to reboot continuity and we're not going to think about any fallout from what's going to happen, right? And so we'll talk about like when they decide to get rid of Superboy and all the chaos that causes. But in this case, you suddenly have a Legion that's ending and you've got a Legionnaire who is in another book. And what do we do? So their solution was to reveal that FaZe is not actually Tinya Wazzo, but FaZe is Enya Wazzo, her cousin? Yeah, cousin. And we've never seen Enya Wazzo before. Like there's no idea of who this character is. But they just wanted to get Tinya back because with 0 Hour, they're wrapping out the OG Legion and they needed to have that big romantic moment where Joe reunites with Tinya and then they all go off to, I don't even know, at the end of an era, where do they all go? To limbo?
They just get kind of, I don't know, reset. I don't know. They go into a white page.
Yeah.
How about that?
And so, and because they have this whole premise of like, we have to pull all the different versions of the characters that exist, right? So you get the clone Legionnaires and the non-clone Legionnaires, and you have these moments where old Lightning Lad and young Lightning Lad come together. So they needed that Phantom Girl.
Well, that's actually a really good point that you're bringing up, though, because we do get, so there's the whole craziness with FaZe that in the 20th century, but then when we have the SW6 batch of the younger Legionnaires, we get the younger Phantom Girl back, right? And then renames herself to Apparition to have a more marketable name. And so we get a little bit of that during pre-0 Hour because that team has like 18 issues or something like that. So we do get to experience Phantom Girl as an actual real character in that.
So I'm just going to say this: if you're listening to this and this is confusing to you, that's how we all felt when we were reading it.
It's going to get more confusing here as we keep talking.
Oh yeah, it's going to get worse. But I mean, I even remember like as a fan, as I'm reading this, just going like, okay, what's going on? Like, who is this person? And it gets confusing. So they reboot the whole thing we get the new Legion, the post-Zero Hour Legion. We get Apparition now instead of Phantom Girl. And so your thoughts initially are you're not a fan of this character. So like, what was it that just didn't work for you?
Well, this really goes back to what we talked about last week when we talked about the Legionnaires annual. The original depiction of her was fine, I think. I mean, I actually didn't mind her so much until you get the moment of her having the star-crossed lovers moment with Ultra Boy. And like we talked last week, it was one of those things where they kind of just threw out her agency. They just kind of threw it out the window. And she ended up just becoming this love-struck idiot to make it that blunt, I guess. Yeah. And I just didn't like it. I was like, okay, you're making these stupid decisions. They're kids and they're in love and whatever. But it was a little bit too soapy for me. And so that leads up to the moment that we talked about last week where she gets killed by the Daxamites. She gets fried. And everybody was very much taken by surprise with that. And, there was a big question of, is this a permanent death or not? Right. And so I was of the camp where I thought it would have been a really bold choice if they had kept her dead. But obviously they did not do that. And they even telegraphed their move on the page where she gets killed, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, I agree. I remember when I was doing all the rereads for my columns, I was reading that and all I kept thinking was, okay, this is a big shock. And I really hope they don't bring her back because not that I didn't like the character, because it's really weird reading Reboot Apparition because when she's not with Ultra Boy, she's actually a fairly interesting character. And I like a lot of the stuff that she was doing. And the moment she's with Ultra Boy, you're just like, this is horrid. And I guess they're trying to write like a couple of 15-year-olds dating or what they think a couple of 15-year-olds are like. I mean, obviously we're not 15, so we're not going to understand that. But yeah, and you just want to have that sort of permanence, especially because I think you could have done more with Ultra Boy moving on from that. Like, and you could have developed that character. And instead, she comes back as a ghost, and then they all just revert back to that annoying, like, teenage angst. I mean, I'd love to say it's like, it felt like an episode of, say, like Dawson's Creek or...
that's a good analogy right there.
But I think Dawson's Creek was better written. Maybe it just didn't happen.
Well, we mentioned they bring her back. So let's talk about that a little bit because we teased this last week when we talked about the annual. So in that page where Ultra Boy and Apparition profess their love for each other, Ultra Boy is conked out from fighting the Daxamite, and he says, which one of you is talking? There's three of you. That's some pretty cool foreshadowing for what we get later.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I hope it wasn't we just threw this line at the wall and hoped. So that's where we get to the chaos of this, where it just gets even more confusing and we're missing some stuff. So we all think Apparition has died. It's this hugely emotional moment. She gets her statue in the Hall of Heroes. And then her ghost starts showing up, but only Ultra Boy can see her. So we're thinking like, okay, has Ultra Boy gone crazy, or is this just, what's going on? Is this a ghost? And there was somebody else who could see her, if I remember correctly, but I'm blanking.
It was her mother.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, so when we first start seeing this start to happen, so Tinya Wazzo, who takes a much more prominent role in the reboot as an ambassador from Bigstill, she's also doubling as a completely psychotic witch as part of that as well, and it's kind of a foil to the Legionnaires and calling them child endangerment and all kinds of stuff, just being a kind of a horrible person. But she's the other person that can see her as well. Naturally, she does go a little bit, crazy when Tinya is killed, right? She's very much anti-Legion and has a lot to say, in that respect.
I hate to say this, but if your child had been killed because they were part of a super team, I don't know if you'd be that was the one thing that I thought, like, that's actually a pretty realistic response. Whereas like when Leviathan died, his parents were like, cool, he died doing what he wanted. And I'm just like, that's not the what? Like, that's... Yeah,
I guess the thing with Winema is that she's just always shown as being kind of a bitch. It didn't matter what the context was. Whenever they were at the nightclub, she was like hauling Tinya out. Yeah. She was bossing her around in other cases. So she's kind of all over the place. But anyway, to keep moving on with the apparition part of the story.
If your 15-year-old daughter was in a nightclub, would you not show up and pull her out? Like I hate to defend her because she does a lot of horrible stuff, but there's a few moments where I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I have a problem with that. As a parent, I'd be like, maybe that's not too horrible. But no, she's written as this horrible character. So the two of them can see her. We get this huge, like long storyline of these two hanging out, and she's the ghost, and how do they get back together? Then when they all get moved back to the 20th century. So I'm going to attempt to make sense of this, and please stop me the moment I get off track on this. So she ends up finding a big still, like, oh no, she's got the thing on her belt, right?
Yeah,
the big still symbol,
or something like that.
The touchstone. And so she touches that, and she ends up making a connection with FaZe, who's still back, even with all this reboot. And I don't.
Well, actually, we haven't really talked about this aspect of where this is going, right? Because one of the things we find out is that the reboot, Tinya's father, is a car guy.
So she actually can split into three,
right? But nobody knows this, including her.
Yeah. So that whole premise of like Kargites can't survive a separate for too long, which they had established with Triad, that's thrown out the window because she's half Bigstillion.
Yeah, half Bigstillion, half Kargite. Yes,
right.
Separated at birth.
Yeah, and so they get separated. She ends up meeting FaZe, and they realize that they're actually the same person, which of course doesn't make any sense because FaZe has always been drawn and characterized as somebody who's not a 15-year-old girl, but probably somebody in their late 20s. But we're just going to throw that out because we have to clean up continuity problems. And so they end up realizing that they're the same person, that they're connected. But of course, because it's a Kargite, there has to be a third person. And rather than make this simple and rather than make this clear for the readers, they draw this huge page of just images, and you're supposed to guess kind of what's going on. And I remember reading this and going, okay, so there's a Luck Lord in here, and there's a third, like what? And
yeah. Well, luckily, there's another Legion issue later on that goes through what happened. Not that it makes it any less confusing. But
So correct me if I'm wrong. So one of them becomes Apparition.
Right.
Do they ever really explain how FaZe goes back to the 21st century?
Yes. Okay. You have to bear with me on this one. So the babies split after they're born, and Minima has no knowledge of this, but the father takes two of the kids to the Luck Lords and sells them to the Luck Lords, where they are essentially raised there and become, or at least one of them becomes a casino girl, doing whatever, dealing cards and whatnot. And then the Luck Lords are attacked by some kind of energy creatures or something like that. And one of them gets sent into the past and becomes FaZe. Now, the problem here, of course, is that there's a third body, and nobody knows what happens to the third body. That one just kind of disappears.
So is the third one so I love this word, so I'm just going to use it. Is the third one the croupier, which is the best job title ever? It's card dealer, but in European casinos they say croupier, and I'm like, I
didn't know that. See, today you're always learning on this podcast.
It's a great movie, a great old movie with, what's the guy's, I'm going to blank. It's this great old British movie called Croupier, and the whole plot is the guy's the card dealer. That's the only reason why I know this. But anyways, so she's the one who disappears, right?
No. The card dealer one is the one who goes back and becomes FaZe.
Okay.
Yeah, so the third one just disappears completely.
So that might be one of those, if we can ever sit down with Tom Pyre, maybe that's the first question of like, what happened to the third apparition?
I know. From a fan fiction perspective, I always wanted to have a scenario where this was like the evil twin, right? And she was like a just a bad seed of a Bigstillion and was just causing problems, or was a thief or something like that, right?
Or the Luck Lord sold her to like the League of Supervillains or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, exactly. Something like that. That would have been cool. But yeah, no, they just kind of sweep it under the rug. But we do have to mention that when they are in the 20th century, Joe and Tinya actually get married, which is, I guess, what a lot of fans wanted them to be doing for years and years now. So they finally did it. So you have two, 15-year-olds getting married. That's great.
So isn't it that Tinya and FaZe touch, and that's how Tinya becomes a person again, and then FaZe because then they get married, because they don't get married until Tinya becomes not Ghost again.
Oh no, they get married while she's a ghost still.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, because they don't merge bodies again until issue 100, the issue where everybody kind of comes back into the future.
So I'm just going to put cards on the table. We're just going to keep talking about cards. I'm just going to put my cards on the table here. I have tried my best to forget this plot line because it's just, as I was reading it, I'm just like, nope, this is dumb. This is dumb. This is dumb. So if I'm getting points right, wrong.
And this is again, we're illustrating why this version of the character was just kind of really annoying to me, because she was just basically pining after Joe most of the time. And then they were pining, and then she's dead. Then they're pining because they can't touch each other. Then they can finally do it. And then, she's still, having this angst because, there's this, she has all these memories of one of her bodies that she never knew about. And then we get to the point where the creative team changes up and we get the Abnett and Lanning team coming in and starting to write. And I don't know, I guess the way I looked at it, right, is that they for years and years they're doing this, and that's a very codependent relationship. And that's what I think I didn't like the most, is that there's this weird codependency between both of them. And it, in my opinion, it did a disservice to both of the characters, both Ultra Boy and
yeah, like he's
Apparition.
He's horrible at the beginning. Like it's almost it's like he's cheating on his girlfriend. He's dating Spider-Girl at the time. He's floating in and out. It's codependent and almost borderline abusive. So Abnett and Lanning take over. Sorry, before we get to that, just the one little kind of wrap up on all of this is like they get to all this. You give them sort of this happy ending, and you mentioned it, but I just want to call it out again. They get married, and they get married in the 20th century, and they're both 15. So illegal in tons of places.
Yeah.
But it's viewed as this like incredibly romantic moment, and you're like, no, they're like children still. Like what? Like
yeah.
And like, and I'll even go like, if you want to say that they're 16, I don't think that makes it much better.
Right. Not at all.
It's still like, and so it kind of misses. And I think that was one of the things, to really kind of pull this out. Reboot Legion had so much trouble writing romantic anything. They just dropped the ball so often. And this is probably the worst example. And you're supposed to think this is this big moment, but it's, anyways. So we fast forward, we get to Abnett and Lanning taking over, and they immediately start. I think it's the very first issue they write. They have Tinya turn to Joe and go, yeah, I'm going on this mission. Don't come along. We need a little bit of time to like immediately change her character. And I think it was them going, we don't want to write this Tinya. We want to write the Tinya we grew up with the Levitz book. And they just immediately go, nope, let's do this split. And actually like, it's one of my favorite moments of her character.
Oh, I love that moment. It was so refreshing. Unfortunately, they kind of go back and they go right back on it again, which is very disappointing. But that one moment was refreshing to see. That's for sure.
Yeah. And then we get the next horrible plot point with Tinya in the post-Zero Hour Legion, which is she gets pregnant. She gets pregnant right before Legion Lost hits. And then Ultra Boy is one of the characters who goes off and is lost. So she's stuck back in the real universe, pregnant. And I guess gestation period for her planet is year and a bit
longer.
like 16 months, like whatever. So there's that big kind of hole that you're like, okay, this doesn't make sense. Like, and all they had to do was just have like one little throwaway line of just like, hey, yeah, this gestation for is for 13 months, and I'd be like, okay, cool, like good, that's fine. Again, she's 15, 16, pregnant.
Yeah, at this point she'd be 16 because the Legion Lost advances the timeline by about a year. So
yeah.
Well,
let's say she gets pregnant at
17, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to be nice and say she gets pregnant at 16 and she gives birth at 17.
Still.
And she goes back to Rimbor because she's avoiding her mom, right? She wants to be close to Joe's family, even though Joe doesn't have really any family and has never talked well about them. And again, we're supposed to think that her mom is a horrible person because she's sending people to try to find her pregnant daughter. And I'm like, again, I kind of don't have a problem with that. Like she hired the wrong people, but I can kind of see the justification. And she ends up meeting the new Timberwolf on Rimbor. And then I think there was supposed to be a romantic triangle.
Yes. There was certainly, based on what we'd heard from Chris Batista. There was going to be some, certainly some jealousy from Ultra Boy regard.
Yeah, and I think they kind of threw that away pretty quick, and that might have been the readers were like, we don't want to see this. So she gives birth, she has a baby boy, and they name the boy Cub, which would make sense if it was Timberwolf's son, but
Right.
doesn't really make any sense if it's Ultra Boy's son.
It was just it's just weird, right? Because I mean, Abbott and Lanning, I mean, they do a really good job with characterization, plotting things out and planning things, but I don't know. When it came to Ultra Boy and Apparition, they just dropped it again. I mean, I don't know why they did what they did unless they were told to do that.
But why would they be like, that doesn't, I mean, why would DC be like, hey, we want teen pregnancy. We want to deal with this. Like, I just don't get it. So I think it's one of those where I think they had this grand idea. And I wonder if it's maybe like the fans were just like, nope. And here's the thing, like, it would have made so much more sense if they had she thinks he's dead. She goes back to Rimbor for the funeral. She ends up mixed up with Timberwolf. She actually starts dating Timberwolf and she's pregnant by him. And then Ultra Boy comes back. Like, I mean, as much as I don't like the plot, like, I don't like the storyline to begin with, but that's at least more interesting than what they end up.
Here's my thing, right? When you have a character, we see this in Star Trek, we see it pretty much every sci-fi, the original Battlestar Galactica, right? Anytime you have a science fiction story where, you have action and stuff like that, anytime you bring one of the characters having a child into the mix, it's just never a good thing. It's always kind of this bizarre sideshow that nobody ever wants to see. So
it's kind of like
a bad call.
Yeah, it's like when Married with Children added 7. Like, you just don't want a baby in the mix when everything is going well. And the other one that I was stuck with is like, there has to be better birth control in the 31st century. Like, what? Like, and these aren't like, she's not a dumb character. Like,
right.
Yeah, like the whole thing just doesn't make sense. So then there's that. And then like, I don't know, every time there was an issue focused on those 3, I was just kind of semi-checked out. And I'm like, okay. Like the one where they're on the ship and Cub's floating around and has both of their power. And I don't care.
Yeah.
So thankfully,
Cub is basically he's the Alexander of the Legion. So if you remember Star Trek, Worf had a child and his name was Alexander.
No. Come on, no. Alexander was not that bad. I'm gonna push back on that one. He was not as bad as Cub. I think it's more he was cousin Oliver of the Legion of Superheroes. I'm trying to think if there's a newer one because we're pulling references from like 40 years ago.
Yeah. I don't know. I've got to think about that one. But anyway,
there's got to be somebody a more recent one. So,
but yeah, I mean, I guess so. Here's the deal, right? Is that the reboot Apparition, Tinya Wazzo, very much a source of most of the melodrama in that version of the Legion. It just, to me, it got tiresome. Like you said, anytime there was a story where she was kind of involved in, because anytime she was involved, it was typically about some drama around her. And I was just, no, I'm noping out on this one.
Yeah. And it's always tough in a comic book when you've got a big cast and the other characters are more interesting and you're just like, stop, either make her more interesting or stop wasting your time on this.
Right.
And I think that was my big takeaway for her on that. So we get to the end of the reboot Legion and luckily all of this is wiped away. We get into 3-boot. And I mean, the beginning of 3-boot, she's kind of just there. And it's actually kind of how she's written. Like, she's written as somebody who is constantly phasing back and forth between Earth and her home planet. So she's kind of not paying attention to anything that's going on either side. There's one of my favorite little short stories in it is when Karate Kid's trying to take her out on a date.
Yeah.
And she's still talking with her ex-boyfriend, on her planet. And it's like, so it's a compelling story until you actually think about what her life would be like.
I know.
Because she's still walking through life on Earth. And then she's like,
I mean, it's one of those things where it was an interesting concept when they brought it up, right? If she's in one world and she's phasing, like the phased version of her is visible in the other world. So if she's physical in Big Still, then we see her phantom form doing whatever, like you said, making out with her boyfriend, which is really, really kind of creepy. Or if she's, fighting on Earth physically, she's, the people on Big Still see her phantom there doing weird gyrations and things like that. So the Reboot is ripe with these, right? These interesting concepts that kind of sound cool, but then if you really start to think about it, it kind of breaks down really quick.
Yeah, you look at these moments and you just sit there and go, yeah, like exactly what you said, like these weird gyrations as she's fighting. And I'm thinking like, so you're walking through Earth and here's this woman, girl, because they're all teenagers, and she looks like she's having a conversation with nobody, and you're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And having said that, like she was so completely unused by Wade and Kitson, and it wasn't until Shooter took over that she actually starts getting page time. I always want to say screen time because that's what for TV, but it's page time.
Yeah.
But even when Shooter is doing this, she's kind of more like she exists to show Projectra going crazy more than she exists to kind of do much.
Right.
So it's really tough. She's kind of forgotten for a lot of it. And I will say this, her redesign by Kitson is really good, but there's not much there for Reboot. And then she ends up being the one who Projectra almost kills. And maybe if we had seen more of her, the moment would have hit harder, but instead you're just like, okay, I don't know anything about this character. So it was kind of tough. Then after that, it was weird. I just finished Legion on Three Worlds and she doesn't show up till like the third last page of the last issue because they're like, Phantom Girl's disappeared. And then suddenly at the very end, she's there to talk to Block. And you're like, so why? Why is she here? Like, what's going on?
Jeff forgot to use her, so she's like, "Oh, I gotta put her in somewhere."
She got a redesign with the Bendis boot, which was kind of interesting. They made her a little bit more like an alien, and they've done a little bit more. But at the end of the day, I think her peak is just the Levitt's second run. Yeah. We always talk about when we talk about these characters, what are their best moments, and I think every one of her best moments come from Levitt's writing her.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, there's a few others too, where she's very headstrong, I guess is the word I use.
Yeah.
And I think those pop up here and there, but yeah, it's not until Levitt's, especially in the Baxter run, I think, where she's really given better due. And there's something else that we do need to discuss about the character as well. And this is regarding the third Levitt's run when he's writing them again in, I guess, the 2011 timeframe in what we collectively call the retro boot, because it's when the 5 years later version of the Legion of Emperor happened. And she's actually elected leader towards the end of this run. Now, that said, the way they kind of end this book is with a lot of bad things happening under her leadership. Among other things, what happens towards the very end is Sunboy gets killed on her watch, and she kind of freaks out about it and runs away. She literally spaces out of our world and goes somewhere. We never know where exactly she goes, but Ultra Boy then assumes the worst and kind of goes crazy trying to figure out where she is. And then the book ends, and so we never find out. And then the next time we see her really is this Bendis Sook redesign that comes up in the late 2010s.
I mean, we're probably going to go on big rants about the third Levitt's run later on, as much as there's a lot of it that I don't want to talk about. But almost there's moments where you're just like, do you not remember what you did with these characters? Or did they just tell him like, don't do this? Because yeah, that was one of those moments where I was just like, well, that's not Phantom Girl. That doesn't read like Phantom Girl, because Phantom Girl was, especially as a member of the espionage squad, a lot of times she would take charge in situations, and she never bailed out. So it was a very weird moment of like, that's not this character. I mean, it's not as bad as what he did to Shadowlass, but I mean, it's still horrible. Again, like, it's one of those things where you read that and you just kind of go like, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like this character should be, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So I was going to move on. So one other interesting thing about Phantom Girl is, of all the Legionnaires, she's maybe made the most, or she's made one of the most biggest numbers of appearances outside of comic books. Like, she shows up everywhere, which is kind of cool. Like, she showed up on The Flash. She's been on a ton of different DC animation series and movies and whatever. And we talked about this when we talked about the Legion of Superheroes animated show. That first season, I think she might have been the most interesting character that first season. I really enjoyed what they did with her. So she's one of those characters that you just see just has crossover appeal. People like the character or the design or the powers or whatever. Like, it just really appeals.
Yeah, I had no idea that there had ever been a live action version of Phantom Girl, of Tinya Wazzo. And prepping for this discussion, I was like, oh my God, I think I had watched The Flash when it was on, but by the time the later couple of seasons was on, it was just kind of unwatchable for me. And that's when they apparently brought this character in. So that was kind of interesting to find out. But yeah, she's also, like you mentioned, the 2006 series. She was also on the last season of Young Justice that they did a few years ago, where they had Cam, Saturn Girl, and Phantom Girl coming into the 20th century. And she was portrayed a lot closer to the Ryan Sook design, at least as far as how she looked, right? She had that kind of a more alien look to her. But yeah, it's like you said, a lot of people like to use the character, which is, it's nice to see.
Well, I think for live action, this is going to sound horrible, but her powers are cheaper to do than a lot of other Legionnaires. So that's probably
true.
One of the reasons. But I just think DC itself, they brought her into, or no, it wasn't her, but it's like her ancestor ends up joining, I think it's the Terrifics. So like,
that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
So this is a character that DC has for, 60 years kind of gone like, yeah, we can do something with this. Like we can do something with this character. And I think she is really important on a variety of different levels. It's just a shame, like as we're talking about her, like we tend to have more stories of, yeah, this didn't work and this didn't work and this was kind of rough. And it's funny because you sit there and kind of go like, yeah, there's really only this period of say like 82 to, I'm trying to think when, or no, 89, 90. That's only 5 years later. So she's got about this 7-year kind of peak where it's like, yeah, she's really good.
But also, like you said, when they used her in Legion 89, 1991 as Phase, arguably you could say that's how she was best portrayed.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue that one actually. Like she was one of the best characters, and it's funny because she's the one it's Brainiac 2, I think, who's running that. So it's not Quill Docs, but she's one of the ones standing up to him like, no, you can't do this. No, you're seeing this. Yeah, sorry, Vril. Yeah, I know there's somebody who would yell at us for getting that wrong. So yeah, and I think she's always like when we think about her, like I think she's a really important member of the Legion, not just for the past history, but a lot of other things. And I think she's that. I mean, I've heard people say like she's the cheerleader, but I don't like that characterization. I think she's the experience. She's the voice of, yeah, I've been here since the beginning. I know the person in the trenches. She's not the leader, but she's the person who's been there. Like you said, like she's been there the longest uninterrupted. So I think that's kind of her role. And again, when she's done well, she's a very strong female character in the Legion who doesn't take a lot of crap and will jump into danger, which especially in the 80s was not how they wrote a lot of female characters. So
for sure.
So now we talk about like the characters that she's connected with. We've already mentioned Ultra Boy multiple times because that relationship, I mean, you could almost say like the writers have considered the Ultra Boy Phantom Girl relationship almost more important than the Saturn Girl Lightning Lad in some cases.
Well, you're not wrong, right? Because when we talked about what they did in the reboot with all of the melodrama around those two, I think there was a large outcry of people that were upset that they did not have Tinya in the 5 years later, and they'd separated Ultra Boy and Phantom Girl. And I feel like that when they came to the reboot and then they have this star-crossed love affair, I feel like that was done to correct that mistake. But unfortunately, they made every bad decision after that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I don't disagree. Yeah, so it's kind of funny. When we talk about the most important relationships in Legion history, they're definitely in the top 3. Yeah, and you're right. A lot of people, that's how they want to see these people together. That's just how it goes. So you've got that connection. I mentioned it before as well. Her friendship with Shadow Lass, which I think was a really great, really well written and really well handled storyline. And I did also mention as well, her complete contempt for Timberwolf, especially after what happened on the planetoid where it looked like Timberwolf was hitting on Saturn Girl. And Phantom Girl just had no time for that at all. Like, just like, I have zero respect for you. And as much as there were a lot of people who hated that because they thought every Legionnaire should get along and they should all be buddies. And I was like, no, that actually kind of is just an honest reaction and an honest response. Like, he screwed up and he needs, and it was always ironically funny when she was calling Timberwolf stupid. And I'm like, you're dating Ultra Boy. Like, that's maybe, and they've tried to retcon Ultra Boy to be like the super smart guy who is just pretending to be dumb. But it's like
that didn't really fly for me too much.
Yeah. Is there anybody else that you'd say like she's connected to as far as another Legionnaire?
Well, the only other person that I would really kind of think of, and just it's more from an association perspective, in the classic relationships would be Mon-El, just because Mon-El and Shadowlass obviously are a couple, so those two couples would hang out a lot. So because Mon-El was buddies with Ultra Boy, just because they had that same kind of strong power set. So those two couples would be paired up quite a lot. He's the only one that could really think of from a Legionnaire perspective.
Yeah, and there was a lot of stuff like when he was in the Phantom Zone, she could go in and kind of help him out. So there was that connection there. I agree with that. I can't really think of anybody else because you did make a great point. They did have that sort of double date kind of sense of the two couples would always be hanging out because they were all friends with each other. All right. So is there anything on Phantom Girl that we've missed or anything that we should talk about?
I don't think so. I think I was kind of going through all the stuff that we were talking about here between the Who's Who and all the different versions. I think that's pretty much her story as a character.
I think so. So the last question we always ask when we talk about these characters is, and especially now that we know there's going to be a new Legion book, how do you want them to use Phantom Girl moving forward? How do you want that character progressing?
I love to see the return to that 80s version that we were talking about, Baxter era. I think the Baxter era would be the best kind of portrayal, right? Just because she's not the source of drama, right? I didn't like it in the reboot because she was just full of drama and not very likable, in my opinion. Whereas in the second Levitz treatments, she was just this very competent, reliable character. She could fight, but she could also do the spy type stuff as well from the espionage squad. That's what I would like to see.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think if you're going to do a Phantom Girl, if you're going to write her, you've got to write her with that Baxter, the volume 3, or even going back to Legion from when Levitz and Giffen take over and they really do something with the character. I was actually thinking what I would love to see for them if they want to actually have a little bit of, we'll say melodrama, but more like sort of a romantic a plot, would be actually have Ultra Boy have to pursue her and her being like, why would I date you? Like, because every time they, like, all the reboot and everything else was always her just as this starry-eyed, like, oh, he's so handsome. And he's just doing dumb things after dumb things. And she's just taking it. And I'd love to see more of her just being like, why would I date you? Like, you're just the dumb jock. And make it sort of that chase or that pursuit. And he's got to prove himself. Because I see her as a woman who'd be like, no, you have to be good enough for me. Like,
no, I agree. And I think that's a really great point because it's the weird split that we've seen, that she's this kind of this very independent woman, but when it comes to Ultra Boy, she's just like, oh, I'll do whatever. And, it's just love at first sight kind of thing. But I was going to ask you that as well, is do you want the Ultra Boy relationship to still be there in whatever we get? Because just to point this out, the 3-boot version, Ultra Boy and Phantom Girl were not a pair. They were not a couple.
And good for her because he was a horrible.
that version of Ultra Boy was kind of a jerk. But
kind of.
I'm being charitable when I say jerk too.
That's like saying the Grand Canyon is kind of a hole. He was to a whole level. So, I mean, here's the funny thing is that I don't think I'm as tied to these two being a couple, but I kind of like that relationship. I think I'd like to see them earn it. Like, rather than just go into the story and be like, yep, these two are together. And I've said the same thing about Saturn Girl and Lightning Lad. Earn the relationship. Like, if you're going to start the Legion from the very beginning, don't just automatically say these two are together. Like, I'd like to see them write it so as the audience we go, yeah, we can see why they're dating. Like,
and I think we'll have to see where they end up taking this new series, right? From the perspective of, are they going to start from day one? Or are they going to be in media res where the relationships are established and whatnot? But they could still work that either way, because as we remember from the retro boot, they had a thing where they split up Shadowlass and Mon-El. And they could come into this new situation where maybe the two are on a break or something like that, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. Or, I mean, I don't think it would be too hard to convince an audience that Ultra Boy did something dumb. And then she was like, and every Ultra Boy fan is going to email us now and just be like, how dare you? Da, 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 da. I mean, again, like, if you're going to say they're all 18, 19, 20 years old, like, I vaguely remember when I was 20, but I'm pretty sure there was a bunch of relationships that were ending and restarting and ending.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right.
For sure.
So I think that would be an interesting way to do it. And I think, but at the end of the day, I kind of like the two of them together. There's a few relationships in the Legion and maybe it's because they were together when I was the biggest fan of that. And that's my connection to them. Right. I still think it would have been hilarious if they had written Karate Kid and Censor, in Reboot as being a relationship, even though she's a snake and he's a human. I'm like, because Karate Kid should be with projectile. So I'd look at it this way. To me, it's more important that it's a good story than they follow the rules of the past. So and I'll just say, if Joshua Williamson, because we know he's going to write it, if he says, I want to go in a different direction, and maybe he's going to say, like, I loved in Reboot when Karate Kid and Phantom Girl could have been a couple. And maybe he goes, that's what I want to follow. And I'm like, okay, if you can take me on a good journey, awesome.
Absolutely. I mean, I would much rather see the story where it's told well and something that I really want to see versus something where they do things and set up these relationships just because that's how it's been done before. As long as she's that strong character, just give me the character who's headstrong and is going to go do stuff and isn't going to play it safe because Ultra Boy wants to protect her, but is like, no, I'm a Legionnaire. I'm going to go take care of this. Yes.
So,
yeah.
I'm happy with that.
That's, I think you just put your finger on the thing that I think we really want to make sure this new version has, right? We don't want to have her be a damsel in distress where she's constantly waiting for Ultra Boy to save her.
Yeah, it's got to be the opposite. It's got to be him waiting for her to save him. So
yes, exactly.
Because I love those. All right, let's wrap this up. So, do we have any recommendations? Anything that's leapt out at you that you'd like, that you think people should check out?
Yes. So I'm going to continue on with my absolute recommendations. The other book, last episode, I talked about Absolute Martian Manhunter. The other one that's really good in the lineup is the Absolute Wonder Woman. Very, very well told stories and strong female protagonist, really driving the stories. And it's, not too different from the Wonder Woman we're used to, but it's, in this slightly different world. So it's a fun read. Highly recommend it. How about you?
Nice. I'm actually going to stay on the exact same super team that I was talking about last time. So we'll just continue it. Maybe I'm just in a huge Fantastic Four obsession right now, but they relaunched the book. I think they're on issue 3 or 4 right now. It's Ryan North is writing, Alberto Ramos is and his artwork is brilliant, even at the worst of times. It's a great looking book. They really captured the Fantastic Four. The opening premise of Doctor Doom as the Sorcerer Supreme, literally going back through time. So every time the Fantastic Four figures out how to stop him, he goes back in time knowing that they're going to do this so he can mess it up again. So it's the Fantastic Four having to think their way out of problems. And I'm always a bigger fan of the Fantastic Four when it's the brain power, not just them beating stuff up or not just them fighting. Like Sue is the leader, which I really dig. Like, it's just that great. She's the mom running the show, which is kind of like real life.
Yeah, right.
So if you haven't given it a try, I would recommend it, especially if you like. And I really like the Fantastic Four, so this is something that I'm quite enjoying.
Outstanding. Yeah. So where can folks find you online?
Oh, perfect. So I write a weekly column. It is at jmlonglivethelegion.blogspot.com. And it's all just about the Legion issues. If you want to find me on Blue Sky, I am at jmckernan.bsky.social. If you want to find me on Discord or on Reddit, my username is Drake Burrows. I'm trying to think if there's anywhere else they can find me. Nope, that is it. How about for you, Jim? All
right. Well, I have my Legion Reviews website at jimboslegion.blogspot.com. where I try to post one comic a week that's somehow Legion related. I'm actually working on an updated version of the Reboot timeline, so that should be hopefully posting that soon. You can find me personally on Blue Sky at jimbofett.bsky.social, on Reddit at jimbofett87, and on Discord as jimbofett on the Legion Fan Club Discord. If you want to follow the podcast or get access to Legion Discord, we're at longlivethelegion.bsky.social, or send us an email and tell us what you think at longlivethelegion2025@gmail.com. So then, until next time, long live the Legion.
Long live the Legion.
Are you tired of watching your beloved characters being tortured by careless authors?
Are you sick of feeling like they could have swapped out all of the painful action and the plot would remain untouched? Subscribe to Books That Burn, the fortnightly book review podcast focusing on fictional depictions of trauma.
We assume that the characters' reactions are reasonable and focus on how badly or well they were served by their authors.
Join us for our minor character spotlights, main character discussions, and favorite non-traumatic things in the dark books we love.
Find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.